The book of Ezra and Nehemiah, bound with criticism of a corrupt priesthood, which had intermarried with foreign women, was alienated from the people. Hence the Mishnah and Avot chose to skip over the priests and to convey the torch of the Torah directly from the prophets to the sages of the Second Temple, Ezra, Nehemiah, and the men of the Great Assembly. You're going to find this in every institution in the world, that when an institution changes from ideal to dynasty, from those who should be leading to those who are leading because they are born to the right family or are connected to the right people, that rebellion always occurs, or tries to occur, to fix something that the people consider to be unjust. People, for the most part, are not anarchists. Most people believe in some form of leadership. What people don't have a tendency to believe in is leadership that they believe to be corrupt, or a leadership that should not be the leadership. An example of this you find as late in Jewish history, as the Hasidic movement. I'll explain to you what I mean. Chassidut, when did it start?
Into the 1700s.
The 1700s. Yeah, by the way, the Baal Shem Tov. Israel Baal Shem Tov founds a movement called the Hasidic movement. It really starts off as a small little thing with a few students in a room that was about this size in the town of Mezbush.
There's hope for you.
See? Look at that. Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov starts a revolution, and his revolution is essentially, don't listen to the Hasidim when they tell you what his revolution was about. They are obsessed with viewing the Baal Shem Tov as purely a rabbi. They don't see the Baal Shem Tov as a social activist. The Baal Shem Tov was rebelling against a system that
that
he
was
felt...
his primary job.
Don't tell the Hasidim that.
Okay.
The Baal Shem Tov was rebelling primarily against what he felt was a corrupt establishment. And a really corrupt establishment. An establishment where they were rabbis of cities and towns, kind of like a chief rabbinate, in which they bought their positions, or they were put into these positions by wealthy people who used them as puppets to control the masses. And the Baal Shem Tov comes in and says, we don't need your great synagogue, we don't need your chief rabbi, we're going to pray in a basement somewhere. And we're going to have some charismatic Hasidic rabbi who's going to pray and dance and meditate and sing and talk to you about your problems. You have to know the rabbis of Europe spoke to their congregation twice a year. They preached to the community twice a year. The Shabbat before Pesach, Shabbat Agadol, and the Shabbat before Yom Kippur, Shabbat Shuvah, Shabbat after Rosh Hashanah. Aside from that, you didn't really communicate with the rabbi. The rabbi was not there for you. The rabbi was a man who stayed in a room studying all kinds of legal codes. And when you had a question, you made an appointment, you came to his house, you asked the question. I had a student recently had to speak to a rabbi. He called the rabbi said, sorry, I don't meet with people. You have to call my secretary and make an appointment with me.
רק החסידים or all the rabbis?
No, this was all the rabbis in Europe. This was the attitude, the style.
Okay.
The Baal Shem Tov came and essentially made an accessible rabbinate, sometimes a little too accessible. The people were so close to this rabbi that he was their tzaddik, he was their role model. I'm not here to judge the Hasidic movement as a positive, negative, where it came from, where was it going. But there was a rebellion that happens in the ranks of the Hasidim. That rebellion happens twice, to my knowledge, but the most significant happens later in Hasidic history. The first I'll talk to you about because it's more interesting to you, perhaps. Everyone knows about the movement of Chabad, the Chabad Lubavitch movement. And sometimes you wonder why it's called Chabad Lubavitch. Chabad is the name of the movement. Chabad is not a place in Europe. Chabad means Chokhmah, Binah, Dat. The three higher Sefirot of the Kabbalistic 10 Sefirot. Chabad philosophy is built on understanding that only they understand truly the spiritual path to Judaism. Right? And that's why they call themselves Chabad, meaning we're the three higher connectors to the heavenly realm. In Chabad literature, they call all other Hasidim Chagas, which are the three lower Sefirot. So it's a normal thing that in Chabad literature, I'm not talking about modern insiders. The Rebbes would say, we're Chabad, they're Chagas. What do you expect from Chagas? They have a lower intellectual capacity in terms of understanding the divine.
What are they called, the Litvish?
Not Jewish.
Not Jewish.
That was they have no relationship at all to those who are not Hasidim entirely.
They do. It's just very antagonistic.
That's right, and that was mutual. It's mutual. So I'm not judging anyone either direction. It's a mutually antagonistic relationship.
Right.
In Chabad, after the passing of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, The first Lubavitch Rebbe's name was Rabbi Shneur Zalman of
Liadi.
Liadi. He wrote a book,
The Tanya.
the Tanya. Essentially, he's the one that codifies for the first time his understanding. And let's be very clear. It's his understanding of what is the ideal of Chassidut. So whereas in Chabad, you cannot be a Chassid unless you devour the Tanya. In other Hasidic movements, if you study the Tanya, you've lost your claim to Chassidut. This is a mutually competitive race here between the different groups. When the first Lubavitch Rebbe passes away, his son becomes the next Lubavitch Rebbe. And not all the Hasidim believe that his son should be the next Rebbe. There was another man who was the primary disciple, the student of the first Lubavitch Rebbe, and he believed that the son was only appointed as Rebbe because he's the son of the Rebbe. But that it was the students of the Rebbe who really understood the teachings of their father. And they founded Chabad of another city. Meaning, Chabad, they call themselves, you know their name? Kapust. Kapust. There's Chabad Lubavitch, there's Chabad Kapust. And almost every Chabad Rebbe after that has breakaways from their groups. World War II sees the demise of most of European Jewry. Fate has it that every one of the deviant Chabad movements is wiped out in the Holocaust. And that's when on these shores in New York, Chabad recreates itself as it was a movement with only 7 Rebbes. They were all the 7 Rebbes of the Chabad Lubavitch dynasty. Because we're not Chabad of there and not Chabad of here, we're only Chabad of Lubavitch. And that means that inside of the Chabad discipline, there are streams, there are approaches, there are different ways to look at things, but those have effectively been eliminated. And today, if you wish to know how to understand Chabad theology, but not based on the writings of Lubavitch, you'll never find it. And the war at hand was, just because you're the son of the leader doesn't make you a leader. Mm-hmm. In order to be a leader, you have to be a leader. The people must accept you as a leader. It's not a dynasty. Spiritual leadership isn't handed down in an inheritance. In fact, where do we learn this from?
Moshe Rabbeinu.
Very good, Moshe Rabbeinu. Our rabbis say, why don't we hear anything about the children of Moshe? Moses, he's the greatest rabbi of the Jewish people. Where are his children? The Gemara says the Torah scholars, unfortunately, sometimes from above it's decreed on them that their children should not be Torah scholars. The reason? So that nobody will think Torah ba b'Yerusha, that the Torah comes in an inheritance. It's not an inheritance. There's no such thing as I inherited spirituality from my parents. Your leadership is based entirely on you. We have a story in the Talmud. The name of the rabbi is slipping me right now. One of you might know. This rabbi is on his deathbed, and his son, who's a great scholar, comes to him and says, Abba, before you pass away, father, please put in a good word for me with your friends, with your colleagues, so that I'll also have a future. I don't know.
Yeah. HaShamayim כמו רבך.
Maybe. Yeah. He says, put in a good word with your colleagues so that when you leave the world, I'll still have a career. And he says, no, I won't do that. Ma'asecha yikarucha, u'ma'asecha yirachakucha. Your actions are what will bring you close, and your actions are what will make you far. I can't put in a good word for you. Jewish leadership does not work like a dynasty. If you want to be a leader, show the people that you're a leader. My good word is not worth anything. That happens a second time in Hasidic history. There's a famous Hasidic Rebbe. That Rebbe is the reason my wife and I got married. His name is the Rebbe of Kotsk. Have you heard of the Kotsk Rebbe?
Yeah, sure.
He's a pretty witty man. The Kotsk Rebbe was a very sharp individual. My wife and I on our first date had nothing to talk about. So we spoke about the Kotsk Rebbe for the whole first date. It was the nerdiest rabbinic date we ever had in our life. We sat there telling the story, this story of Kotsk, that story of Kotsk, the next story of Kotsk. The Kotsk Rebbe, whether you're a Hasid or not, is a personality who was all about the truth. He was a radical, not genuine, radical truth seeker. His expectations of his Hasidim were so extreme that even though they were considered the most truthful Hasidim, the last 19 years of his life, he left his Hasidic community and locked himself in a room alone. He said, even my truthful Hasidim are all a bunch of liars. He couldn't handle
Akavya ben Mahalal.
Akavya ben Mahalal. Very good. The rabbi that I mentioned to you before was Akavya, the son of Mahalal. He writes the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah of the third chapter of Pirkei Avot was written by Akavya. The Kotsk Rebbe used to always tell people that he prefers an evil person who's aware that they're an evil person than a righteous person who thinks that they're perfect. He said because God doesn't need righteous people, he wants genuine people. And he only wants to hang around genuine people. So if you're an evil person but you're self-aware, says the Kotzker Rebbe, I'd rather hang out with you than with a righteous person who's not self-aware. His famous teaching of his, if I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I and you are not you. But if I am I because I am I and you are you because you are you, then I am I and you are truly you. This is his famous teaching. You have to be yourself. That's what you have to be. In Kutz, there was no uniform of how to dress. There was no... Every person had to be an individual. The reason the Kotzker Rebbe starts his own movement is because of his rabbi. His rabbi was... his student. His rabbi...
The Yid HaKadosh.
The Yid HaKadosh. The Yehudi HaKadosh of Peshischa. The Peshischa Rebbe. The Rebbe of Peshischa was a student of...
Baal Shem Tov?
the Chozeh of Lublin. The seer of Lublin. The seer of Lublin was the first Hasidic Rebbe that when he passes away, his son takes over. And his Hasidim revolted. Just because he's your son, he should be our leader. Half the Hasidim chose to follow the son. The other half followed the most charismatic of his students, the Yid HaKadosh. This rabbi was the first of the Hasidic Rebbes to make prayer happen later in the day, to do things that were very different than the way Hasidim were done before, because he believed that Hasidut cannot become an institution. A revolution, a movement that was meant to rebel, cannot now become institutionalized. You must continue rebelling. It has to be unique. If there's nothing unique, there's no purpose of having Hasidim. And he started this movement. The Kotzker Rebbe was the next in that dynasty. The last 19 years of the Kotzker Rebbe's life, when he's not leading his Hasidim, he hires another person to step in for him. Who is that?
Not the worker, no.
That's his best friend.
Right, that's his best friend.
The Chidushei Harim,
Right.
the Ger Rebbe, the Ger Hasidim, have you ever seen those Hasidim? They come in to take over for Kutsk. And then the last in that food chain, to the best of my knowledge before World War II, is Rav Simcha Bunim of Peshischa. Rav Simcha Bunim of Peshischa is such a radical Hasidic Rebbe. They'll never tell you this in the Hasidic circles, but they have many of his books. He's considered a very scholarly Rebbe. He was a pharmacist. He worked all day in a pharmacy. He wore a short jacket as opposed to the Hasidim who wore long coats and fuzzy hats. He trimmed his beard nicely. He was very well groomed. He would sometimes sit and play chess in the park. He was a very intellectual person, a very modern looking person. And his whole attitude was, you have to be genuine. You don't have to dress like all the other Hasidim dress. You don't have to work like all the Hasidim work. You have to be real. He was a radical believer in being genuine. I told the story here, maybe on Shabbat. I don't know when I told this story. I've told it a few times here in the community anyways. There was a famous Sephardic rabbi called Rabbi Binyamin Lau. He was a Persian rabbi that was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Porat Yosef, the Sephardic yeshiva in the old city of Jerusalem. Rabbi Binyamin Lau was very famous for having a very short trimmed beard, which in the ultra-Orthodox community is a symbol. Your beard is a symbol of, the Amish are all about not having mustaches because that's a sign of arrogance. They're right, because if you go to the ultra-Orthodox community, how big your beard is a sign of how important you are. And there was a man. I was once at the Kotel, at the Western Mall, and a man stopped me. He was a little crazy, but he said the truth, so I accept the truth from wherever it comes. He grabbed me and he said,
Hakova.
Hakova lo kovea. Your hat doesn't establish anything. Ha'me'il lo mo'il. Your coat, it doesn't help you with anything in life. Hakipa, zakan, someach levad. Your beard, it grows on its own. You don't have to cut it. It just keeps growing for as long as you want. V'hakipa ola 5 shekel. And your kippah costs 5 shekels. Meaning, it doesn't make a difference what kind of hat you have, what beard you have, coat you have, and so all those things are external characteristics of a person. And when we as a religious community start, and someone said, Yeshomim, she'aniva lo mosifa anava, that your tie doesn't add any humility to you. The whole get-up is just external. And he didn't look like the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the academy that he was supposed to look like. And one of his students said, Rabbi Binyamin Lau, why are you dressed? Why don't you have a long beard? He says, because when I come into a room and I teach Torah, I don't want anyone to listen to me because of the size of my beard. I want that people should listen to me because of who I am, not because of what size my beard is. His student was so inspired that he went and trimmed his beard. The next day he came back to Rabbi Tzionah Bashul and says, Rabbi, they fired me from my job as the head of a yeshiva. So, well, clearly in your yeshiva, they only listen to you because of the size of your beard, not because of who you are. Unfortunately, we've been dealing for a very long time with leadership that becomes corrupt. Even the greatest leadership. We have a holiday of Chanukah. Chanukah, the Maccabees, I mean, they're our heroes. We even pray about them in the services. We add in their names. Matityahu, Yochanan, Kohen HaGadol. They come, they wage a war against the Greeks, and then the Maccabees disappear from the face of Jewish history. Their kingdom lasts for a very long time, but we don't talk about them. In the story of Purim, who are the heroes of the Purim story? Esther and Mordechai. Who are the antagonists of the story?
Haman.
Haman and Achashverosh and
This one.
Vashti. Yeah, Vashti. Some people today want to turn Vashti into a hero. I've been reading articles about Vashti is the greatest hero. She was the first woman who said no to a man. Okay, you can stand up for that value, but not through Vashti. Vashti was a pretty terrible person. She wasn't a nice lady. Vashti, Achashverosh, Haman, Mordechai, Esther. After we win the story, we write a book, a Megillah, and it's added to the Tanakh. You know that after the story of the Maccabees, they wrote a book too. In fact, there are 4 Megillot of the Maccabees. And none of them were added to Jewish literature. Because the kingdom of the Maccabees, the first generation was righteous, and the rest became corrupt. They believed that it was them who won the war. There was no God involved in the story. It was them who could rule over the Jewish people, while the Jewish people owed them something. And eventually the Jewish people said, well, you're not important enough to us. You were once upon a time great leaders for us, but today you're nothing to us. The generation that we're dealing with is a transition. There's a transition from a leadership that should have been done by the prophets. And when the prophets were not doing their job, or when we lost the prophets, more correctly, it was supposed to be handed over to the Kohanim. The priestly class was supposed to teach us. And then the Kohanim, they bailed out on us. They betrayed the Jewish people's trust. And therefore we just skipped them. We cut them out of Jewish history. And as important as they think they are, or they thought they were, they don't make up any of our great rabbis. And even Ezra, who's going to step up to the plate, and he is from the family of Kohanim, and he becomes the greatest Torah teacher of his generation, doesn't go by the title Ezra HaKohen, because the Kohanim are nobody you want to be connected to anymore. Ezra becomes Ezra HaSofer, the scribe, the rabbi, the teacher, because that's his new identity. Let's read the bottom of page 9. The changes introduced by the men of the Great Assembly. So we're going to talk about some reformization of the Jewish religion, which happens at the hands of the Anshe Kehillat, the men of the Great Assembly. People who think that you cannot change Jewish law are mistaken. People who think the Jewish people have never recreated themselves or redesigned things are mistaken. We're not the same people that we always were. We are the same people, but we have constantly redefined ourselves and readjusted ourselves, and a generation which is unable to do that within the boundaries of Jewish law will eventually see itself disappear. Let's read. Let's read the bottom of page 9.
I'll read. The dramatic transition from a world characterized by divine revelation to one governed by acquired knowledge meant that the men of the Great Assembly had to bring about far-reaching changes in the way the people interacted with the Torah.
So they realized that change has to happen, and this is the change they put into play.
In particular, their twofold challenge was to change, 1, the context of the interaction, bringing the Torah out of the temple into the world of people, and 2, the nature of this interaction, moving from a world of prophets and visions to one of tradition and learning.
So we mentioned in the past that transition from seeing God to hearing God. The transition from teachings that we could visualize to teachings that we had to hear. There was a shift that happens in leadership of prophecy to leadership of the sages. 2 things are identified by the men of the Great Assembly, that Sheikh Nasadullah, that anonymous group that we really know only a few names from. They see that there's a big problem in the center of the Jewish faith being a geographic location. If the Ben Mikdash, if the temple is where people go to pray and to worship and to be good and to observe, then what happens the rest of their life? What happens the rest of the day? What happens when the temple becomes a place of corruption? What will happen to the Jewish people when their center, when their headquarters becomes corrupt? It's something we're struggling with today. It's something we're struggling with today. The Jewish community has followed a non-Jewish model of turning the synagogue into the center of Jewish life.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be that way. The synagogue used to be a place where you went to pray. But it's not where everything Jewish happened. Your home, or where people lived, in the shtetl was the town square, and the Mela was the courtyards between people's houses. In which that's where Judaism thrived. That's where the meals happen, or weddings happen, or bar mitzvahs happen. That's where people talk to each other, where people study with each other. Today we live in a world where I come to synagogue to be Jewish for 3 hours on Shabbat, and the rest of my life I just wander around without that mission. We're reverting back to a model where my faith and my belief and my connection and my learning is centralized in one place. And when something happens to that connection of mine to that place, or when something happens in that place that leads me to have a falling out with it, my Jewish connection is cut off entirely. It's a dangerous model that we're following. It's a model that the men of the Great Assembly came to try to fix. To get Judaism out of the Beit HaMikdash. They're preparing us for today when a Christian missionary comes over to you and says, "What about the blood of Christ?" And you say, "What? What about the blood of Christ?" Say, "Don't you know the book of Leviticus, of Vayikra? You have to bring this goat for that, and this bull for that, and this ram for that. What about the blood? How do you atone for all your sins when you don't have blood?" And you look at them and say, since when was Judaism a blood-centered religion? And that means the men of the Great Assembly did a terrific job. They did a terrific job at changing the track of Jewish history so that we could survive as a people without having the temple be in our midst. They're already getting us ready for the next step, for the step of exile, which may sound counterintuitive. But they need to make sure that when the Beit HaMikdash, the temple becomes corrupt, the leadership becomes corrupt, then we eventually don't have that place. We still will survive as a people. So we look at them and say, we don't need blood. We have prayer. We have holidays. We have family dinners. We have mitzvot. We have tefillin. What do we need blood for? So the men of the Great Assembly won. The second, the nature of the interaction. Meaning not just to move the location of the interaction, the context of the interaction, but to make sure that we can move from a world of prophets to a world where everybody studied for themselves. You weren't waiting for someone else's vision to tell you something. You were waiting for someone else's godly experience to tell you, but every Jewish person now, this is what you were talking about 2 weeks ago, has to step up to the plate and educate themselves enough that they can lead their own life. And these are two of the big steps that the men of the Great Assembly try to do, and we're going to examine exactly how that translated itself practically. So we're at the top of page 10. Paul, you want to continue reading?
10. We shall examine these changes as they found expression in the enactment of the sages of the period.
So enactments in Hebrew are gzerot or takanot. Those are words you're going to hear. It's a gzera, it's a takana, it's a decree, an enactment. Basically, these are what you would call, I'm comparing two texts that are not so comparable, but a Torah, the Constitution, has amendments to it. Those amendments are equally important as the Constitution. Rabbinic enactments are seen as amendments to the Constitution, not in such a way, God forbid, as the Torah becomes null and void, but that there are times and places that require a different approach or a different type of leadership or a different way in which to observe the things that we were commanded so they can reach have their desired effect, even if it looks different.
Bringing the Torah out of the temple into the public realm. The greatest innovation of the leaders in this period was transferring the center of divine service from the temple into the home and community. Ezra and Nehemiah generated a religious reform that emphasized reaching out to broad sectors of the people and calling for their active participation in all aspects of religious life. The 10th chapter of the book of Nehemiah describes the making of a covenant between Nehemiah the leader and all the residents of the land. Looking at the names of the signatories, we can see that all sectors of society were involved. This covenant represented a direct continuation of the approach of the prophets. Every prophet from first to last warned against ritual practice disconnected from a focus on the relationship between man and God. Quote, "Surely obedience is better than sacrifice," unquote, Samuel. "What need have I of the magnitude of your sacrifices?" Isaiah. And the most sublime hope that the land shall be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as waters cover the sea. Isaiah. In the spirit of these teachings, the first action of the men of the Great Assembly was to bring the Torah into the public realm, bequeathing it to the entire nation without making any distinction based on tribe or status.
I'm going to stop you right here. This is more important of a paragraph than you might think. Essentially, you read about change that's happening. Ezra, Nehemiah essentially is coming to bring the Torah back to the people. But that last sentence here, in the spirit of these teachings, the first action of the men of the Great Assembly was to bring the Torah to the public realm. And before that, they write, this covenant represented a direct continuation of the approach of the prophets. It
So
represented a direct continuation of the approach of the prophets, but not the way of the prophets. Meaning, Ezra and Nehemiah were trying to continue the legacy of the prophets by doing things differently. This may sound simple, but it's not so simple, because the Jewish people are fighting over this today as we speak.
What are we fighting over?
We're fighting over a lot of things, Pauline, a lot of things. but this one I'm going to bring out to light. The place of innovation in Judaism. Tradition, the way we've always done things, to the way we do things, to the way we should be doing things. There's always camps in the Jewish world that are more conservative and more liberal, if I could use those words. I'm not using them in any modern context. And those that wish to hold on, everything that our grandparents did must be done the same way today. And those who see absolutely no value to the way that our grandparents did things, and it has to only fit what I need it to have. There has to be a middle ground, and this is what we're trying to explain here, we're trying to bring out here. Before I do this, there's a famous translator of Maimonides' works. Rambam wrote his books in Hebrew and in Arabic. His works in Arabic needed to be translated into Hebrew. Why did the Rambam write books in Arabic, if he knew
He
Hebrew?
lived in Egypt.
So who was he writing them for?
For the people.
For the people. Meaning, the books the Rambam felt the people needed access to, he wrote them in English.
In
Arabic.
Arabic.
Which is
The
like the way,
English of
which is
that
like
day.
the
Way
way
we
we
do it
write
today.
English. Meaning,
Yeah.
if
the
you
people.
want a book to be accessible to the people, you must write it in their language. But you should, the moment you write a book in English, what I'm essentially doing is cutting it off from any Israeli community in the world, which is a significant Jewish population. Meaning, if I wish to write a book that the scholars of the Jewish people should be able to look at, it has to be done in the language of the scholars of the Jewish people, which is Hebrew. When I was in Israel, one of the rabbis I was studying with, he said, you're writing books in English. He said, but if there are ever things that you wish to change in the way the rabbinate works, you have to write it in Hebrew. Because the only way you can reach the rabbis is if you write in their language. Just like you write in English to reach the people, if you wish to change the rabbis, you have to write in their language as well. It's an important observation. The Rambam, at a certain point in time, people realized that his books that he wrote for the Arabic population, the Arabic-speaking population, the rabbis also want access to it. People from other countries also want to be able to read it. And so it needs to be translated. And who steps up to the plate to translate his books?
Ibn Tibon?
Yeah. Ibn Tibon. Rabbi Shlomo, Rabbi Shmuel.
A Jewish person?
Shlomo.
Yeah. Rabbi Shlomo Ibn Tibon.
נכון? I think Rabbi Shlomo.
Ibn Tibon was a famous Chacham, a Jewish rabbi, who also was a translator, an expert in Arabic and in the Hebrew language. So you can't translate. Sometimes you'll see books that are translated into English, and you could tell the person who wrote the English was more proficient in the original language than in the English they would translate into. Or you find the other way. They're extremely bright in English, but they didn't understand properly the context of the Hebrew. When do we see this? A lot with the writings of the medieval rabbis who wrote in Arabic. You see that there were European rabbis who knew enough Arabic to translate the books, but they were missing on the nuance in the words. They understood the word, but not the... It's kind of like when a person is an immigrant to the United States, and English is their second or third language, and they can speak English, but you'll use an expression which literally means one thing, but actually means something else. How do you expect that a person should understand the context of that expression?
Break a leg.
What? Right,
Yeah.
break a leg. Break a leg. You tell that to somebody who came in from another country, what do you want me to break a leg? But it means good luck. In every language you have this. And therefore, Ibn Tibon is the translator of Arabic who can also express himself perfectly in Hebrew. And he writes a letter to the Rambam saying, Rambam, I wish to meet you so that I can start translating your works. And what does Rambam tell him? There's no time to meet me. I wake up at this hour, 3 o'clock in the morning. I get on my camels, my donkeys, whatever. I travel to it's Cairo, I believe that's where he went, to go be the doctor of the king. I'm with him the whole day, with his patients, with his family, with his mother, and then by the time I come home, it's already dark outside, and there are people waiting in my living room.
Yeah.
And I come into the living room, and I still haven't eaten anything, so I ask them for a few minutes, and I go say hello to my family, I eat some food. I come back, and sometimes I'm falling asleep while people are talking to me. And then I go to sleep after the last person has left my house. And then I start all over again the next day. He says, when do you want to meet with me? I said, maybe you could come, and on Shabbat I could give you a few minutes of my time. He said, but I don't know when we'll be able to have a chance to meet. He says, rather the advice that I'm going to give you as a translator is the following. He says, most translators make the mistake of translating literally, word for word, what was written in the original text into the new language that they wish to translate to. He said the result of translation like that is a very cryptic and very hard to understand language. You translate every word, yeah, everything is translated perfectly, but it sounds like gibberish. He said the job of a translator is not just to translate accurately, but to convey the message properly. First, read the paragraph. Understand what it is you wish to convey, and then translate it. It would be better if you took liberty by not translating literally, as long as you can convey the message coherently. That teaching is happening here as well. There are always going to be those people who say, well, we have to do things the way we always did them. And then those innovators, they want to change the things we did the way we did them. And Zohar Nehemiah says, no, we're going to do something different. We understand exactly what the Anshe Knesset Gdula wanted. We understand exactly what you meant. And now we're going to translate it the way we know how to translate. Somebody once asked a great rabbi, what is the difference between movements who innovate in Judaism that are identified as halachically observant movements? I don't use the word religious or orthodox. I don't care for those titles. Those who are loyal to the sources of halakha. They also innovate. They change things. We change things all the time. And those movements within Judaism who change things as well, but are not halachically observant. And the answer is precisely that. There are those who change, they innovate in Judaism, because they have tremendous respect for what was, and they wish to preserve the integrity of those teachings for the future. And then there are those who innovate because they feel that what was is outdated and it's archaic and it's irrelevant to the Alma, and they don't see any value in those things, and that's why they innovate. Both people are innovating. Both people may even innovate the same things, but they're doing them for entirely different motives, and those motives are important. We see a struggle in the Jewish community today. Can we change things? Can we do things differently than we did? There's a camp that says we're afraid of people who change. Because in the past we've seen Jews who change, and they destroy the Torah. They don't care what's written in the Torah. They'll do whatever they want.
So when I do Shabbat service, Shabbat at my house, I innovate. So the woman of valor, as I've seen it in every printed Judaic text, has been transformed. And all the women love it, I add more singing to my Shabbat dinner. With an explanation of what we're singing, like Elohai Neshama Shana Tata Bi Tehorahi. We take some time to sing that. We sing for 3 or 4 minutes, Shiviti Adonai L'Nagdi Talmid, and then with an explanation afterwards. What does that really mean in our lives, to put God before you? And anyhow, and then we conclude with the Woman of Valor, as I've rewritten it several times, but now I've got one that everyone loves. So I do that because in every single Shabbat book, primer, whatever, any place I've ever gone, and they, I'm supposed to follow here, go through page whatever, it doesn't speak to me. And so I love Shabbat in my home now. Bill loves having Shabbat in our house too. He's gone from no interest to time to light the candles.
Wow.
It speaks to him. And
Well, let me ask you
And
this question.
he sings Shalom Aleichem. You know, we negotiate once or twice. You know, each stanza, but he's into it. You know, and it's like we have a nice evening.
You have a rebirth of Shabbat.
Well, here's the question. So why did you do what you did?
Because I really started asking myself, am I just saying this because I'm supposed to?
I'm going to ask you a question again. Because you're defining yourself by what you didn't want to do. Why did you do what you did?
I was looking for something that was going to uplift me, that was going to put me into a little bit of sacred space.
Okay, can I say it for you?
Yeah,
You saw the value in Shabbat
yeah.
and said, I wish to take that spirit that I know Shabbat has to have and put it into reality.
For
in
me,
which,
yeah.
Yes, in which case, your innovation in the realm of Shabbat was meant to enhance Shabbat and to give it meaning where previously it didn't have.
Right.
That's not the same as somebody saying, I want to add more songs because I don't want to do Kiddush. I hate Kiddush. I don't like Kiddush. Kiddush is not, we want to do Kiddush on vodka because we're high schoolers and we want to get drunk. That's innovation also, and that makes it really relevant to college students if you're going to get drunk with the Kiddush wine. But that's not innovation for the sanctity of Shabbat. You understand what I'm saying? There are two people who can change what is traditionally done on a Shabbat service. One is coming from a motivation of, because I wish to make this better. I wish that the spirit that I believe Shabbat should have should continue. You can go to some Hasidic places and they'll sing for 4 hours straight in a Shabbat. And you'll go to some other Jewish homes and Shabbat meal, if it takes longer than 15 minutes, everyone's already feeling pressure. I know when I was in Baltimore, for example, if Shabbat lunch took longer than 45 minutes, it was considered overly long. It's too long.
Really?
They would finish services at 10:30. Let's say 10:45, everybody sat down. 11:30, everybody was grace after meals, and they were done in their bed. They were sleeping already.
Oh my.
45. Maybe an hour. They had a rabbi who spoke for a very long time. In bed 11:45. And what do? They sleep the whole Shabbat. 6 hours they sleep. Meanwhile, some groups will go back to the synagogue and they'll debate each other, they'll learn with each other, they'll sing with each other, they'll dance with each other. And I think everybody always recreates in order to make something more relevant. But here's where I'm going to press a little bit harder, and that is, would you feel confident saying that you're going to publish your Friday night service as the authoritative Friday night service as based on Jewish law of centuries? No, you wouldn't, because you didn't do it as the head of the Rabbinic Assembly of the United States of America, correct? Right. And here's where the difference happens. We're aware that in every place in the world, in my wife's family, when little kids sang Mani Shana in Hebrew, they also sang it in Yiddish, because they wanted everyone to know what was going on when they were singing Mani Shana. In my dad's family, they sang it in Arabic, in a Yemenite Arabic. My mother's family, in a Moroccan Arabic. Those were things that every family had its thing that they did. The question is now, when you're dealing on a national level, we're actually going to edit our religion. That takes not just guts, but it could be even insanity. Especially with a people that is obsessed with the way it does things. Filler on the roof may be an over-exaggeration of certain Jewish cultures, but it's not a lie. Exaggeration just means they took something that's true and put it on stage. The tradition song, this idea that we only do things because that's the way we always did things. As a rabbi, I'm personally offended by that belief, but I can tell you that there are millions of Jews in the world that's their religion. Their religion is tradition. Everything is tradition. They can't explain to their kids. They don't know exactly why they're doing what they're doing, but it's tradition. And to go and innovate in the world of in a traditional space is very difficult. And the rabbis here have the gut to do it. The first thing they do is the enactment of prayers and blessings. Marlene, you want to read for it?
The enactment of prayers and blessings. The renewal of life in the land of Israel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One last sentence. And that is essentially what Ezra and Nehemiah are trying to guarantee. We are editing Judaism, but not because we're rejecting the teachings of the prophets. We are the continuation of the prophets. We believe that the prophets are the greatest prophets who ever lived. We wish to preserve what was the word that he used? We wish to represent a direct continuation of the approach of the prophets while practically changing the way the prophets instituted things should be done. So they're innovators, they're reformers, but out of a pure desire to be a continuation of the prophets, not a rebellion against the prophets. This is my whole... Marlene, go for it.
The renewal of life in the land of Israel spurred the leadership to actualize the teachings of the prophets as part of the religious reform. This required the enactment of edicts, decrees, and customs. The most well-known of these dealt with the institutionalization of religious life. The men of the Great Assembly enacted blessings and prayers, sanctifications, and havdalot for Israel.
Let me pause you right there. So the first thing the men of the Great Assembly do is create blessings and prayers for the Jewish people.
Because before that, it was the priests who prayed, but the people didn't.
Before that,
Yeah.
blessings and prayers were not a thing. If they were individual people prayed on however they wanted to pray. This is their first step, and let's read the next paragraph to see the magnitude of that step.
This section of the Talmud embodies a wealth of material concerning the activities of the men of the Great Assembly. The single phrase, blessings and prayers, encompass almost the entirety of our religious world. Can a person be religious without reciting blessings and prayers?
I'm pausing here. This is a translation from Hebrew. Can a person be religious? I'm sure a lot of people, because I'm religious and I don't make blessings. That's not the definition here. Meaning, could you imagine, we're saying, there's this religion called Judaism, but nobody blesses and nobody prays. Could you even imagine that you come to the synagogue and you wouldn't pray? Because who prays? What would you do? What would you do in the Beit Knesset if you didn't pray? What did a synagogue look like before the men of the Great Assembly? What did the Shabbat tape? What did Kiddush look like if we didn't make a blessing over the wine?
There weren't synagogues before the men of the Great Assembly, right?
Sure, we did something in the temple.
In the temple.
But the
were
priest did it for you,
Right.
So
Yeah,
what he's saying is,
right?
the men of the Great Assembly essentially created the Judaism that you and I know today. The 3 prayers a day, the blessings before foods, the blessing on wine, the blessing on bread, the blessing at the wedding ceremony, the blessing in the 7 brachot ceremony, the blessings by the funeral, the blessings on the baby's brit milah, the blessings when you have a new child. All of these things were created overnight by the men of the Great Assembly. I mean, to understand the magnitude of the reform, you have to imagine if you took away all of those things from the current Jewish experience today, what would be left? Meaning, can a person be religious in today's context without reciting blessings and prayers? I mean, what would you be doing exactly?
How would you know he's just?
Yeah, we have this discussion about our forefathers studying Torah in the Torah Academy of Shem and Ever, B'Yeshivat Shem ve'Ever. It's the children of Noach had an academy of Torah study. And he said, there's no Torah in the world yet. What did they possibly study in that place? I mean, they studied Torah, but there is no Torah. So what was Torah before there was Torah? What was religion before there was religion? That's essentially what we're talking about right now.
Well, maybe it was a spiritual sense of something deep inside wanting to be expressed to who knows what. Not talking to your friend, not talking to your spouse, not talking to your child, but something from deep inside that people feel. I think human beings have always felt something deep inside, call it spiritual or what, and wanting to somehow express it.
Correct. But we were already an organized people surrounding a Torah and a religion for many, many, many years before this happens. So aside from the innate feeling that every person has, as unique people with a unique spiritual tradition and a legal code and a shared religious experience, what exactly was that experience? Like, what are we doing?
Well, but if we look at the rural agricultural nature of the times, when the temple was in place and the priests were doing their thing, and maybe the 3 main times people showed up to the temple.
Was 3 times a year.
Yeah, it was 3 times a year, was Passover, right, Sukkot, and
Shavuot.
And Shavuos. Not
The
even
3.
Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
That's right.
And if they didn't have little buildings called shuls or whatever you want to call them there, where 10 men got together to do whatever it is they did,
That
and
was
they
the
probably
bulk of-
didn't do anything else. That came
Well,
afterwards.
that-
That came after the second temple, and that came with Yavne and the
So we're
great
gonna-
sages
this is exactly what we're
creating
gonna see
all of
now.
that. So wait, I'm not done.
Oh.
So my question is, what were all of those people doing out there?
That's our question too. That's what we're
Well,
doing
what
right
were they doing? I don't think they were doing much of anything.
I find it very hard to believe.
Well, I think though there are 2 things that they were doing. The first one is they were learning, whereas you may not find that prayer was something institutionalized. Learning always existed.
They didn't read.
You always no. in this generation that comes back to Israel, they were illiterate, and that's what the rabbis are dealing with. Before that, you have a very literate population where most of the time they were learning, and those who worked in the field, and that's something I think is fascinating. You find it says, Moshe haya ro'eh tzon, right? He was, in the end of the day, he was a shepherd. You find all our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, all shepherds. And there's this beautiful commentary in Shemot on exactly that pasuk where it says, Moshe haya ro'eh tzon. He said, I don't understand. Every great leader, like the credentials weren't PhDs, accountants, doctors, they were shepherds. He says what's unique about a shepherd is that most of the time he doesn't spend with people. Most of the time he spends outside in a huge field looking at the sky, interacting with nature. And that solitude directly connects him back to God. And I think that's the element you're touching on, which is a very deep spiritual connection by being outside in the world and becoming one with something much grander.
But it's one that's highly informal.
But it is highly informal, correct? It's not.
That's why we need to read the top of page 11. Come on, Marlene. Page 11.
Like people who came before, like Abraham, he didn't have the Torah, but he knew stuff. He just knew stuff anyway.
Right.
So these people were studying.
Okay, so you want to ask what were they studying Shivat Shem and Evel? Probably what they were studying Shivat Shem and Evel are all the things that are. See, much of the Torah is not. You didn't need God to come and tell you not to murder someone.
That's,
right?
yeah,
if you needed Hashem to tell you, the real question that we have is on the generation of Noach. How could Hashem punish a generation of Noach with a flood if they were never commanded not to take other people's wives and not to steal people's things and not to hurt other people? And our rabbis say it's precisely because you don't need a Torah to tell you not to take. Well, very good.
Right.
That's what it means. That the derech eretz kadmat Torah. We translate this in our modern understanding that you have to be a good person before you follow the Torah. Really, what it means is before there's a Torah, there are laws that they're objective. And this is in the big debates in the Catholic Church: is morality subjective or objective? Judaism believes both. There's definitely an objective morality in the world, and there are subjective things. We would never know that you have to keep kosher. Kosher is not a moral thing. What does it have to do with being a better person? We don't know. Hashem said to keep kosher. That's one of those things we take His word for. But the generation of Noach should have known better. The Yeshiva of Shem and Evel were those who were studying the things that was, I wouldn't say common sense, but it was objective morality, objective truth that existed already in the world. That's what they were doing in the Yeshiva of Shem and Evel. Top of page 11.
Our daily routine is almost inconceivable in their absence, since one's entire daily connection to Hashem is summed up in these words: blessings and prayers. Without a blessing or a prayer, we have no stable meeting point with Hashem, and are left only with the spontaneous overtures at times of grace, of joy, or, heaven forbid, of crisis.
Right. Meaning, when do we pray and bless without any system? Is when we're provoked, when it's pushed, when someone, God forbid, dies, when someone is born, when something is happy, or when there's crisis. People pray all the time. When there's crisis, they pray. But until then, they don't. Meaning, those were the only times people met God, so to speak, was when they were forced to. The men of the Great Assembly are doing something else.
Those are personal prayers. These are formal prayers.
Correct.
The men of the Great Assembly understood that the life of simple people far from the temple, a rural farmer perhaps, had no spiritual dimension or possibility of touching the holy. They saw that only by formalizing the relationship between the individual and his Creator would all people have access to the inner spiritual lives, to their inner spiritual lives. That's an interesting assumption.
That's very debatable.
Debatable and dangerous.
Yeah.
By institutionalizing something in hopes that it will engage people in religious connection with the divine, you're also taking the risk that
You'll turn
Turns
everybody
people
off.
off
it will turn people. Why will it turn people off?
because they didn't. You're telling them say these
Institutionalized
prayers because
It's
they're
not
going
the
to be
same as
lifted, and you're not.
It's not real.
It's
It's
sterile.
not personal. I mean, when my rabbi always says, you come to the synagogue and you pray the prayer book from A to Z, you didn't actually pray. You prayed all the things you need to pray because the rabbis were giving you a context of, you say, what should I pray for? I don't know. So the rabbis gave you 19 different things to pray for. But those 19 different things are only the tip of the iceberg of what, those are suggestions of health. How could you pray for health without detailing the things you need health in? You know your medical problems. You know people that are suffering on a medical level how can you skip that paragraph without mentioning someone else's name in it? Without praying specifically about what you're looking for? You reach a blessing of sustenance. So you're praying all about the rain and the fields and the growth, but really, you don't work in a field. You work behind a computer, you're working in a car, you're working at your desk. So where is that part of the prayer which you personalized for yourself?
Yeah,
Our rabbis essentially gave you an outline for prayer because they wanted you to come and be able to pray, have somewhere to start. But to say that the outline is enough, imagine if someone came to a meeting, a board meeting, a meeting at work, and they just read the highlights. Okay, we're supposed to discuss budget. Next, we're supposed to discuss the next. But they don't discuss anything. That's exactly what most people do in the realm of prayer. The danger of what the men of the Great Assembly did is apparent. We see it every day. It's the people that say, this is not personal for me. It doesn't do anything for me to say the same words every day in and day out.
So they created a table of contents, and then we were supposed to fill in the pages.
That's exactly the point. That's why our rabbis are so adamant. Rabbi Akiva, when Rabbi Akiva would pray, they say he would start on one side of the room, and he would end up in the other side of the room. From the amount of bowing down he would do and the movements that he would do. So yeah, he was saying the same prayer as everybody else in the synagogue. But it wasn't reading from a book. It's for that reason that Zohar suggests that how do you pray looking at your book? You have to pray with your eyes closed. The Zohar says, how do you... And it says something esoteric, like, those who pray with their eyes open will never see the Shekhinah. I don't understand that literally. I don't say that this is by the way, Rabbi tells if you keep your eyes open because you need to know how to read the words, that's why your eyes are open. You're not there to... But if you know the words, and you just think that mumbling words off of a piece of paper is your spiritual connection to the divine, you'll never merit to see the Shekhinah. That's never going to happen for you. You have to be able to close your eyes and make this personal. That's why at the end of the Amidah, there's a whole paragraph that's meant to be a paragraph of personal prayer. And it's a fascinating thing what we did. Our rabbi suggests some 20 different personal prayers. And we took one of them and institutionalized it. I mean, that last paragraph, that last, before we take 3 steps back of the Amidah, that is one of 20 suggested prayers. Our rabbis all recorded what do they pray for at the end of their Amidah. I even saw one Siddur, it took all those 20 prayers and put it inside of the Siddur so you could say them. The point of that was not that you should say what they said. The point of that was you should write your own prayer that you say at the end of the Siddur. We found Chacham Mordechai Eliyahu, the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, Alav Shalom, he passed away. I think it's already 10 years. Could it be 9 years? Yeah, it was Thursday. Thursday was his askara. I was at his funeral in Israel. A very beloved person to me. The approach, the style. Not necessarily the halachic path, but the overall personality. Chacham Mordechai Eliyahu, when he passed away, they found in his wallet a handwritten prayer. If you don't mind, if I could just find it for you, because it's very moving. What is it? Okay. They found a paper in his wallet. He was a dayan, a judge on the rabbinic court, and he wrote a prayer to say whenever he would go into the court. It looks like this. Maybe I'll post it in the classroom. They found this in his wallet.
Oh, wow, it's beautiful.
It's a handwritten prayer. Marlene, you saw this? The handwritten prayer in the wallet of the chief rabbi. And it says the following. Ribono shel Olam, Master of the Universe, Galui v'yadua lefanecha, it's revealed and known to you. Shelo al da'ati amadati l'sharet am k'doshecha ladun l'horot. So that it wasn't my choice to stand up and rule over your people, to be a judge over your people. Yadati me'ut erki, I know how low of a person I am. Mach shabarchin, I'm the lowest of the low. Lo bikash niflod mimeni, I didn't ask for things that are greater than what I could do. Ach kach horu li rabotai. But that's what my rabbis, my masters told me to do. They told me that I'm fit to be a rabbi. V'kach gilgalta kol hagilgulim v'sivavta kol hasibot. He said, and that's how you caused all the causes to take place. And you organized the world, you lined up the stars in such a way. Hekimota me'afar dan, You picked me up from the lowest depths. V'tasti shem kashem agdolim. And you gave me a name as if I'm one of the great leaders of the Jewish people. I mean, this Hashem, it's your doing. My rabbis pushed me into the rabbinate. But you caused all of these things to happen. Now I'm a chief rabbi of Israel. He would say this every day in this prayer. And therefore, Hashem, it was you that decreed upon me to rule over the Jewish people, to teach the Jewish people, to judge the Jewish people. And for that, Hashem, I bless your name and exalt you higher. But I am overcome with trembling. Fear and shaking takes over me. About the tremendous danger that is hovering over me. This is a reference to Talmud. This is, I see as if the gates of hell are open beneath me. And I'm judging myself. I'm putting my life on the line by judging other human beings. He said, I am an ignoramus who knows nothing, and therefore I crawl before you, Hashem. Where can I turn for help? Where can I run away to? But Hashem, I trust in your great compassion. And I beg before you, that you hear my prayer. Please, God, the God of the spirits, please have compassion on all the judges of the people who are sitting on thrones of judgment. Especially on me. I, your slave, the son of your maidservant, Mordechai ben Mazal, Mordechai the son of Mazal. Rachem alai, have compassion towards me. V'teni lev shomea v'dat lehavin lishpot damecha. Give me a heart that can understand, that can hear a person who's standing before me when I judge them. Chonenu chuchma bina dad v'askel. Give me wisdom and knowledge and compassion and understanding. Shlo nomar al tahor tameh v'al tameh tahor. Let me never say that which is pure is impure and that which is impure is pure. Al mutar asur v'al asur mutar. Let me never say that which is forbidden is permitted and that which is permitted is forbidden. Al zakai chayav v'al chayav zakai. Let me never make one who is innocent guilty and one who is guilty innocent. V'tatzilenu mikol shgiyot v'taviyot. Hashem, save us from all mistakes and errors and judgment. Libi chazak veitan lochiach kol osei avel. And let me also have the strength to be able to reprimand all those who perpetuate evil against others. Latzil ashuk miyad oshko. Hashem, allow me to have the courage to save the oppressed from the hand of their oppressor. V'al yisienu yitzrenu la'alim ayin chas v'shalom. And never give me the temptation to look the other way from another person's suffering, God forbid. It's very easy to not get involved in someone else's problem. It's not my problem, it's your problem. Let me never have that yetzer, it's an evil inclination to not care about another person. Allow me to fix all of the holes in the fence, all the breaches of law. Allow me to make decrees that are useful for people. To spread the Torah. And allow the name of God to be sanctified through us. And you should allow the fear of us to be in the hearts of people. What's that all about? Why do people have to fear the judge?
So they would do the right thing?
Allow the people should look at us and have awe of judgment. They shouldn't take the law lightly. But at the same time, but let our love for them be chiseled on their hearts. At the same time, while they're afraid of us, allow them to know that we love them more than they should be scared of us. It's a prayer of a judge. It's what a class I gave on Shabbat. Nobody's asking for you to adopt the Jewish legal system again. But what about the personality, the nobility of Jewish judges? And let us stay away from arrogance and from anger and from being particular with people, overly particular with people. Hashem, give me the strength, the valor to be able to put up with your people. This one is very special. I should say that sentence every day. Hashem, the Jewish people are difficult. Ask Moshe Rabbeinu how difficult the Jewish people were for him. But let me put up with them. Let me not be upset at them. Let me not despise them. Gal and I open my eyes, v'abita niflaot mitoratecha,
Wow.
and I will see wonders from your Torah. You can like this prayer. You can hate this prayer. You can feel like it's a
But it's
self-deprecating.
authentic. It's authentic.
This is his prayer. When he went into the rabbinic court, he didn't go look in the Talmud and say, which prayer should a judge say before he goes to recite? He wrote his own. He wrote his own because he's his own person. That doesn't mean he didn't pray 3 times a day in the synagogue. It doesn't mean he said, oh, you know what? Organized religion is not for me. I'm going to burn my tefillin and throw it in the trash. He said, no. I'm going to take the outline that our rabbis gave us in which to connect, what is it, to meet with the divine. But I have to make it my own also. I have to own it as well. I'm not going to stop doing Shabbat dinner, but I'm going to add things to that dinner that make it mine. Why not? Why wouldn't you? You miss the point if you think what's printed in the prayer book, it's there because it's the bare minimum that a person has to do each day.
Well, when you go through a service, like a Shabbat service, Saturday service, really the only time you can do that is the 2 or 3 times you have the Amidah
That's right.
in the service, and that's not a very long time.
In some
About
communities,
3
right.
minutes, Amidah, 4 minutes of quiet.
That's right.
If you time it, am I
but
So a 3-hour service, you're looking at 12 minutes of being able to silently express yourself.
Well, your 3-hour service is just the organized part of the Shabbat prayer experience. What about the rest of Shabbat? The rest of Shabbat is made for personalized experience. This you cannot sit in a room with 20 people and personalize prayer out loud.
Right.
Even in our temple. In the temple, what happened? Everyone would pray out loud. They would pray out loud. When it came time to confess your avilot, the vidui prayer, where we, it's funny, in the Ashkenazi community, they do that out loud. Ashamnu, baganu, gazanu,
Formalized. It's
libanu,
formalized.
A rabbi say that's the one prayer you can't say out loud. Because why should I confess the things you did? You can say, you know what, yeah, Hashem, we were embarrassed, yeah. Hashem, we spoke bad about people, for sure. Yeah, Hashem, we were disrespectful to our parents, absolutely. Hashem, I didn't steal this year. Why should who did you steal from this year?
But each one of us is responsible for the other.
That's fine. And that's why we do this quietly. Because in a place where we're personalizing the prayer, you cannot do it out loud together. But the knowledge is that when I'm in the Beit HaMikdash, that's not the time for personalized prayer. This is the time for a communal prayer. And there's value in that. I'll tell you the truth. When I go to New York,
Although,
when I go to New York and I am in Borough Park, and there's no Sephardic synagogue in Borough Park that I found here. So I go
one
to
Yemenites.
right. I go to a regular Ashkenazi minyan, and that's nice. Ashkenazi minyanim, the thing I love about them is they're very fast. Nobody's schlepping you for 3.5 hours like we do here in the morning. 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you're done. You go home. By us, it takes forever. But I come to a synagogue, and I'm not saying all denominations and all places, but they say, how do they start Kabbalah Shabbat? They say the first sentence and the last sentence. In the middle, it's mumble, 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 mumble. You're right. So in that way, Kabbalah Shabbat takes 20 minutes. But you can't compare it to Kabbalah Shabbat when I sit at the kotel or when I sit in my little chair in the synagogue and the whole community is singing, for me, that experience of praying, yeah, set words, standard words, a set tune. But in a room full of people, it's like on Yom Kippur when for some people that highlight is the Torah is coming out, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, El Chabayim V'Chesed V'Medot V'Chesed V'Rabim, Lo Zavon V'Fesha V'Chadav V'Lakeh. What happened there? You say that 3 times a day in the Jewish prayers. You say it all the time in the Jewish prayers. But you cannot compare that feeling of saying it mumbling in your bed before you go to bed, or when you're saying it on Yom Kippur with 400 people in a room. That prayer experience it's transformational. But if you think
Try singing it over and over and over again while you're driving.
it was
Pretty powerful.
This what do I say?
Over and over again while you're
One of the
chanting
rabbis, when I was in Yeshiva in Baltimore, one of the rabbis, he's not with us, he would ask a person who came to his office, he would say, hey, let's say what time is it right now? It's 12, time for the class 10. It's 12 o'clock. He would say, how many times did you say Shema Yisrael today? said, it's 12. I said Shema Yisrael when I woke up at the synagogue. I said, Shema Yisrael, how do you only say Shema Yisrael once a day?
Twice.
How do you say it? How can it be that by 12 o'clock you didn't say it 12 times already? My rabbi, when I used to walk with my rabbi in the streets, under his breath, the Song of Songs, the crossing of the sea, under his breath. How do you only do that alone? Sometimes you have to do it alone.
But there's a very powerful reason for doing that also. Because, your mind is monkey mind. It goes all over. And, you could be walking to and from synagogue or whatever you're doing, and you could choose, to say Shema Yisrael, while you're walking and doing, or you can choose to have your mind go, I got to buy this, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to call this one and whatnot. And actually, it's a lot nicer to say Shema Yisrael over and over again.
That's right. I'm praising that.
To stay in one
That's the way I'm praising
that.
point.
And this is important. What I'm telling you now is people say, is meditation in Jewish tradition is important. I don't meditate personally, but I'm not talking about meditation in terms of, meditation is prayer on your own. It's experiencing yourself. Is that important in Jewish tradition? Absolutely. So how come when I come to the synagogue we're not meditating? Because in the synagogue is not where we're meditating. The synagogue is where we're praying this communal prayer. But there could be a half an hour after services where people are sitting around together and they're sitting quietly and they're praying. If you go to any synagogue that's open 24 hours a day, at any time of day that you go inside, you're going to find people sitting there in silence, people there dancing, people there crying, people there. That's a normal thing. But it's not the part of the institutionalized prayer to expect these things. Our rabbis, we stopped in the middle of the paragraph, which is why I want to finish the paragraph before we say goodbye.
I had a thought though. I do think though, for sure you need the time alone. I happen to think we can all go to a concert and we're all singing the same song, and yet we're all feeling something different. We're all thinking something different.
We're doing it together.
But we're doing it together. And I think in a communal prayer that it's hard when you don't know the text, which is why usually people get stuck with the text. But once you know the text, the communal prayer also becomes a source of personal meditation where you're doing it together. We're all chanting together. We're all singing together. But my mind and your mind may be in very different places. My heart and your heart are soaring at totally different planes. And in that sense, it's no longer, I need only my own space because I couldn't do it in these 3 hours. I learned to combine the two, and that's very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So, and here's where I want, if you could finish this paragraph for us. Prayer and blessings. This is important. It's the flip side of everything we're saying.
Prayer and blessings introduced a framework of basic religious consciousness. Basic religious consciousness into the religious world of the layman. This was a revolution that called upon every Jew to participate actively in the service of Hashem, rather than to rely on the knowledge that sacrifices were being offered in the temple on his behalf.
So here's where I'm judging you. It's giving
you the whole structure.
Very good. Because you come from a Judaism where there's so much organized prayer, you feel this need to, what about personalized prayer? Because that's the first critique that you say on and organized. Where's the personality? Where's the individualism? But the men of the Great Assembly, whereas they see that danger might happen in 2,000 years, right now they're dealing with a community which has only communal prayer, has no individual anything. And their whole point is they see prayer, establishing an institutionalized prayer, as saying, stop letting other people pray for you. Stop letting other people dictate for you how your religious life looks. It's your obligation as a Jew of the new era, of the new men of the Great Assembly era, to own your Judaism, to study your own text, to know how to read your own language, to know how to pray on your own, and not just pay some guy over there to go kill goats for you. Whereas we criticize them as institutionalizing, formalizing prayer to make a relationship between God and people, they were revolutionary in the sense that they were trying to do the exact opposite. Their whole point was not about whether it would become too institutionalized. They were concerned that people weren't doing anything in the first place. And they wished to empower the people to become their own religious ambassadors. And that is the greatness of the men of the Great Assembly. This is Takana number 1. The institution of prayers and blessings is the first step of the men of the Great Assembly to do two things. To change the context, we mentioned the context. No longer is prayer centralized in the temple. And 2, the nature. They changed the nature of what prayer and blessings look like by turning it from something communal to something individual, from something that's loose to something that's formalized. And that's very important. And God willing, next week we'll talk about the enactment of reading the Torah in public. And we'll have a beautiful day. Thank you very much for learning.
Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you.
This is so interesting.